Welcome to our Writers' Symposium by the Sea. I'm Dean Nelson on the journalism faculty at Point Loma Nazarene University, where we have the symposium. Today we have the distinguished guest, Otis Chandler, with us. He is probably one of the most significant forces in journalism of the last 50 years. He has been the chairman of the board of Times Mirror. He's been the publisher of the Los Angeles Times, in charge of books, television, all of the various things that Times Mirror has been involved in. These days, he's been widely quoted on a variety of topics and highly sought after, and it's our great delight to have you here, Mr. Chandler, with us at our symposium. Thank you for coming. Now, here's my first question for you. Has anything interesting happened in your life recently?
Well, it really is something that I really didn't expect that would ever happen to me. I thought I was nicely semi-retired, that I would only come out of the Ojai Hills occasionally when I thought there was something for me to say about journalism, or to give a speech or come to a wonderful program like this. And then last November, as some of you may know if you haven't followed what happened last November, it was called what I call the Staples Center in Los Angeles journalistic screw-up by the Los Angeles Times, or the Staples Center mess. And we were highly embarrassed by it and quoted all over the world about what we did and what we did wrong. So maybe we'll chat about that later.
Well, but for those who have been living under a rock for the last few months, if you could just in a sentence or two summarize what that was about.
Well, what happened under our current management, the Staples Center, the famous sports center in Los Angeles that's next to the convention center, it opened to a big hoopla. And as newspapers normally do, you give it a welcome to the community. And the Times, I assume, was planning to do a special section. And I probably thought, because I didn't check on it ahead of time, that it would be what we call an advertorial section. It would be filled with ads. It would have editorial content not written by our staff, but contract writers. It would be pro-Staples Center, because if in an advertorial section there is not editorial independence, it's known as an advertising section. And in an advertising section, it should be labeled an advertising supplement to the Los Angeles Times. So I assumed that was what was coming. And then lo and behold, I pick up the Sunday paper, and they took our very fine Sunday magazine that is a pristine editorial section, one of our most important parts of our Sunday paper, and the entire Sunday magazine was devoted to the Staples Center, and it was all favorable, which was curious to me because I know our writers and I know that the acoustics couldn't be perfect and all the seats couldn't be perfect. So that raised the first issue, and then it wasn't labeled special advertising supplement to the Los Angeles Times. Then I came to learn that not only did we use the wrong section and didn't use the right terminology in identifying the section, but there was a side deal, there was a secret deal. And our advertising marketing department and our publisher and our chairman of the board of Times Mirror were involved in making a secret deal with the owners and the advertisers and the concessionaires in the Staples Center, that they would split the revenues with the Los Angeles Times. Now, this has never happened in the history of any major newspaper quite this way. There's been some gray areas with some other papers, but never just splitting the revenues and then not telling the editorial department, not telling your editors, not telling your writers. You can imagine how they felt. And imagine how I felt. Well, it really meant, to cut to the chase, it really means that the Los Angeles Times was for sale, that you could advertise and get a share of the profits in any ad that you might put in. In fact, the Democratic Party came to the Times after this and said, let's do the same deal. Now that you're for sale, let's see if we can get a cut of the action. So I ride motorcycles, among other crazy things, and I came in one morning on my motorcycle, and I'd just gotten up to here, and I said, I cannot take this any longer. I'm going to have to go public, even though I'm not supposed to. I'm supposed to be retired, and Otis, stay away. You've been there 50 years, and we've seen enough of you. And I picked up the phone and called our city editor, Bill Boyarsky, and I said, Bill, I have a few thoughts I'd like you to take down. And I dictated this. I didn't write it out ahead of time. I just dictated it, and it was mainly to the editorial employees saying, I know your pain. I know your embarrassment. I know what this must mean to your journalistic ethics, to your reputation, to the reputation of the paper. I thought it would probably be trashed, that the current management would hear about this Otis Chandler missile and would just throw it in the wastepaper basket. But Bill Boyarsky is my hero because he stood up to the editor, to the publisher, and to the chairman of the board that said, you will not read this, you will not post it. And he read it to a gathering that afternoon of about 400 editorial people who were absolutely stunned that I would do this, that it was really Otis. Otis is back. Otis cares about us. And from then on, it hit all the media throughout the country, throughout the world, and was highly embarrassing to the company. So that was the first event that was kind of a shock being to my system. And then
anything more recent, perhaps?
Well, Monday morning when I read the Los Angeles Times and the Times Mirror Company, and all the units of the company are going to be part of the Tribune Company of Chicago. And I knew this was coming, but just the seeing it in the paper and hearing it on the news, and I turned channel 2, not to pick on CBS, but I heard clever repartee at 6 a.m. in the morning between the anchor lady and the male anchor, and she said, well, this is a good thing because my paper's been late the last 5 years. This is a true story. My paper's been late the last 5 days, and this will help get it to the door on time because obviously the Times is falling badly on its face and it needs to be bought out. And so from now on, maybe I'll get my paper for the rest of the week on time.
Well, leave it to the TV people to get right to the heart of the matter.
Right to the heart of it, right to here.
Well, now, this had to have felt a little strange. I mean, your family has owned this newspaper for more than 100 years.
107 years. My great-grandfather, General Otis, came out from Ohio, went to Santa Barbara, started a newspaper, failed, came to Los Angeles in 1881 and bought a struggling little weekly with 2 partners called the Los Angeles Times. He went daily with it, and then he bought the partners out in 1883, and the paper's been in my family ever since. So this is a huge, huge emotional wrench to not only the Chandlers, but to all of our employees. I'm very sad when I talk to our employees throughout the company, whether it's the Times or Newsday or the Hartford Courant, or we own Jeppesen and Company, and we own magazines, and they're all saying, what does it mean? Mm-hmm. Do I have my job? Mm-hmm. What's going to happen? So it's
well, but it raises the question, is there room in this country anymore for a locally owned, community-based newspaper?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I don't think this says that. I don't think it says that all major or even small-town newspapers must become part of chains or a larger corporation. A good example here is your fine paper in San Diego, which everyone has been trying to buy for years, including the Times Mirror Company. And they've all been rebuffed, and I think it's a wonderful thing that the union has remained in Helen Copley's hands. There has been for 25 years amalgamations between newspapers and newspaper groups. You have the Knight Ridder, you have the formation of Gannett from practically one small paper into the largest number of papers. So it's been going on for a long time. So I think there's certainly a place for small or medium-sized or even large independently owned newspapers and magazines and television and so on. But I think what this was was an opportunity for the Times-Mirror Company to place itself with a company very much like ours. The Tribune Company has a culture, a history. Their products and services complement ours. They're in newspapers. We're no longer in television, and they have 22 television stations, 5 radio stations. And they've done a superb job, which we haven't done, in connecting with the internet and really seeing how far you can go with content from your television and your newspapers on the internet. We have not done a good job. I'm very critical of our current management because they haven't done it in the last 5 years. In fact, they've downsized the company and sold off books and magazines and so on. No, I think there's a place for independent newspapers, and I hope they continue, but this was such a unique opportunity to place ourselves in the hands and work with a very fine company that we know. The markets work together. We have Newsday on Long Island, and they have the television station in New York. They have Channel 5 in Los Angeles, and they now have the Los Angeles Times, so it was a perfect fit. And very frankly, we were going downhill under our current management. And I could see it going downhill, and I think this was a chance to put our company, which is not as strong as it was, together with an almost equally sized company, a unique opportunity that probably never come along again.
So just to be clear, you don't have to say that this is a good thing. I mean, you're sort of out of the picture now. So there's no real. You really think this is a good fit?
Well, if I didn't think it was a good fit, I would have said so publicly. And if I didn't think it was a good move by our directors and our other shareholders, I would have said so. No, I think this is an excellent move. This isn't the first time the Times-Mirror Company. When I was chairman in the 80s, we looked around at other merger partners. I even had a contact from Bertelsmann, which is a huge company in Europe. Would we like to have some discussions with them? We thought about the Tribune Company. We even speculated about Gannett. I think I may have had a conversation with Al Newhart. We thought about the New York Times, the Washington Post Company, and so on. So this wasn't a surprise. What I'm glad didn't happen, which was a rumor going around over the weekend that we bought the San Francisco Examiner, and you would have heard from me on that one because that would have been a terrible acquisition.
All right, now it seems like every chance people get, they're ready to sound the death knell for newspapers in America. But newspapers, when they began as political pamphlets and then moved into a different kind of evolution, television comes along and people say, okay, that's the end of newspapers. People are saying very similar things about the internet that they were about television in regard to newspapers today. Is a newspaper even relevant anymore?
I think they are. I think they are for people of my generation, for people that are younger than I am. I have 17 grandchildren and 3 of them in college, and I talk to them about newspapers. I try to talk to as many young people as I can about their reading habits and what's their interest in news off of the internet, what's their interest in television now. I think there's a place for good newspapers, but they must be very good newspapers. They must be extremely well written. They must be unique and special, not only covering the local news, but giving you much more than just the local news. I think they need to tell you what's important in your community, what's important about the candidates, but they have to be well written. They have to be able to pull you in, just like a good magazine or a good book. Last night we were privileged to hear George Plimpton, a wonderful man and a wonderful writer and an old friend of mine, and I think he talked about that. We have to have quality writing, and if you don't have quality writing, and if you don't have a good marketing department, that means selling advertising and circulation.
Preferably in 2 different parts of the building.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, I like to get into that too. No, I think newspapers have a role. I've heard that newspapers are a thing of the past, and I remember, what was it, Alvin Toffler in Future Shock in the 70s, and he talked about 1990. We weren't going to be reading. We were going to be plugged in at night when we were asleep, and we were going to have nocturnal learning, so we wouldn't have to read anymore. We would wake up and we would have read the paper. And all of those predictions of the demise of print have not turned out to be true. On the other hand, the internet is something that I can't figure out its future. I can't figure out where it's going and how fast and what its impact is. Now, it's not just an impact on newspapers.
Right,
I didn't
right.
think you meant to infer that. I worry as much about television. We had network television division of Times Mirror up until recent years, and now we're joining the Tribune, and they have network television stations and some great independent stations like Channel 5 and the Superstation in Chicago. I think television has had an enormous diminution in its influence. And I think the networks, as we all know, have gone from a prime time 80 or 90% 10 years ago to what are they, 55% audience today. I worry about radio. I worry about cable. You mix it all up, and I'm not sure where it comes out. But I
Well, let me go back to newspapers for a second and read you a quote from John Katz in Wired magazine. He says, "Newspapers have become our most entrenched bastions of Luddism, clucking endlessly about the immorality of rock music, the internet, violence on TV, bare breasts on websites, vulgar rap lyrics, the decline of Western civilizations, and the dangers of trick-or-treating. This is what newspapers are."
I think that's a bit of a reach, a bit of a stretch. I think we're a lot about a lot of good things beside that. I think we're relevant. I think we have writers that cover the new age music, the rockers, the new languages. I don't think, if a newspaper isn't up to date in all aspects of its news coverage, whether it be foreign, national, hard news, soft news, sports, financial, entertainment news, which is huge. The Los Angeles Times used to derive 10 years ago its majority of its advertising revenues from department stores. You'd think, well, today there's still department stores and there's discounters like Walmart and Target and so on. We derive the majority of our advertising dollars, as most papers do today, I suspect the Tribune too, from entertainment. From entertainment advertising,
Right.
all facets of it, everything that you can buy, every new trick device, every new this and that, plus all the .com companies.
Right.
So I may be a dinosaur in my age, but my outlook is that newspapers still have a very relevant role, but it's going to be the toughest competition they've ever had to face with whatever's coming on the internet, more so than when television gave newspapers a run, or radio, or cable. I think now it's a very fascinating subject. I'd like, and if any of you in the audience have the answer to that question, I'd sure like to hear it, because I certainly don't know the impact of the internet as it's growing and changing by the second. I don't know the answer to your question. I just have those opinions.
We have a considerable number of people who will be watching this who are just wondering, and who are in the audience today, who are just wondering, is there still a voice in this country for good writers? Why? I know what you've said, that newspapers are going to depend on good writers, but I want to explore that a little bit more. What is the place for good writers anymore? It seems like everything is factoids, little two-paragraph things, very brief summaries.
Well, I think there's certainly a direction toward the summary newspaper. Of course, television, radio, that's all quickies. In terms of writing, just to give you a little bit of history, when I became publisher in 1960, the Los Angeles Times had been voted recently, a year or two before that, one of the 10 worst newspapers in the United States. Now, I will defend my father, who was publisher during that era, and say the Times was not one of the worst. It was not a good paper. It was not a great paper. It was a WASP paper, what we call a WASP paper. It was local, provincial. That you wouldn't find in it labor news, because the Times, in case you don't know, it was blown up by two men, the McNamara brothers, who were hired by various crafts to blow up the Times in 1910, kill my grandfather, my great-grandfather. And they blew up the Times and killed 23 pressmen, and it started the Union Wars with the Los Angeles Times. So that's the history. history of it. But I don't think that...
It wasn't as bad as they said.
I don't think it was as bad as they say, and we have unions in the Times-Mirror Company and Newsday. We have not interrupted any of those contracts in our other newspapers.
But it was called one of the worst.
It was called
one
of the worst. So what I did was I decided to try to make the Los Angeles Times one of the best newspapers in the world. And it was probably, I guess, I spent a lot of money. I guess it was the greatest growth of a single newspaper in the history of newspapering in terms of its circulation, its advertising, its profits, and most importantly, in the quality of the writers that we hired and the editors that we hired. I remember my Washington bureau, we had a two-man Washington bureau, very undistinguished, not important, not good writers, and not good reporters, mainly hung around the so-called reporters' bars in Washington and picked up a lot of stuff out of the AP and turned it in. And I said to my editor then, Nick Williams, I said, let's go after the very best Washington bureau chief writer that could bring great distinction to the paper and run a good bureau. And it was Robert Donovan, who wrote PT 109, and he was the head of the New York Herald Tribune Washington bureau. And everybody said, in our shop, you'll never get him because he won't work for the Times. The Times is not a place where distinguished writers and editors want to go. So I personally recruited people like Bob Donovan, Paul Conrad, our two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist, Jim Murray, Pulitzer Prize-winning sports columnist, and on and on and on. And then I set out to rebuild the Times in every possible way, from type, from graphics, from new sections. Every part of the paper was redone. I took the budget from about $2.5 million when I came in 1960, the editorial budget, to well over $50 million in 10 years.
Okay, but that was 30 years ago. Now,
yes.
But I'm looking at right now a room full of potential writers who are wondering...
I'm getting there.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Far be it from me to hurry you.
You didn't interrupt George Plimpton last night.
He never breathed.
When he was telling his story. I'm not as clever and as funny and as humorous
I
as
won't
he
say
is.
another word.
The Times, therefore, continuing right along, became a writer's newspaper. And I think that it still is a writer's newspaper. If you happen to read Dave Shaw's 15 standard size sheet section that he wrote following the Staples Center, that is the kind of journalism that we do. If there's an important subject, we allow the writer to go on, and sometimes maybe too long. And that's what we did, and that's the way we attracted very good writers, and it gave them a chance to take any subject. I mean, I don't know, the left-hand column, page 1 of the Los Angeles Times today it's not as long, the articles aren't as long, but they're different subjects, they're not on the news, they're interesting things, and that was an idea I stole from the Wall Street Journal, because they had a left-hand column. I'm not above stealing ideas. And
it's great writing in that column one.
Yes. So I think with the diminution today, unfortunately, of the Los Angeles Times in its editorial content, it's been cut way back, and there's an advertising to editorial ratio now that's just horrible, and a lot of our good foreign and national copy gets cut or doesn't appear at all, and there's been a exodus in the last 5 years of some of our best writers and editors from the Los Angeles Times that have just, I'm sure they've made applications to the union, and I think we lost 30 reporters to the New York Times. I was recruiting new reporters and editors from the New York Times and not having much difficulty in getting them, and from the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal. Now it's the other way. Very sad. We're not the writer's paper that we were, but there is a role for good writing in good newspapers, and you and I could talk about some of the papers that have very good writing. I think we still have some good writing. I think when there's a big tragedy like the plane crash off of Point Dume up in, up in Ventura County, that horrible plane crash, if you lay all the papers side by side, I don't think there's a paper probably that did any more of a complete and thorough and analytical job with graphics and everything that we did, or Operation Desert Storm. We do brilliant work still on those kinds of stories, but day in and day out, I think we've become quite weak.
Okay. Last question. What advice would you give somebody who wants to go into the field of journalism today?
Well, I think they should look upon it as an opportunity. I don't think they should look upon it as something that is a mistake to do, whether they go in print or whether they go in broadcast. I think you should go in with your eyes wide open about what are the opportunities for employment, because there are fewer newspapers and there are fewer magazines that are successful, and there's more group ownership in television and cable. But I think it's still a growing, exciting business, and I think there are opportunities for very good people to come in and be very successful in his or her careers. So I don't think it's something that is a dinosaur by any means. I don't think that the internet is going to replace all other traditional media who may become mediocre and then kind of waft away and disappear. I don't see that happening. I don't know the answer, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay. Otis Chandler, thank you very much for being with us today.